Hey there guys, and welcome back. Before we get started on anything, I just want to dedicate this movie to my little Pteranocylus murinus, mature male, shown here. Scaris, we called him. He matured back on my birthday in January this year, and he's done really well to get this far. We didn't actually breed him. Neither my girlfriend nor I were particularly comfortable with the idea, and sadly I've seen him this morning in the standard death curl. He has started moving since, but pretty certain that the little guy hasn't got long left. So this movie is dedicated to this guy. Today I wanted to talk about substrates. Now, substrates are possibly the most important part of a tarantula enclosure and can make the difference between a good enclosure and a bad one. Now, for a terrestrial, substrate's important for fairly obvious reasons. If it's a burrowing species like a Haplopelma, then they're going to need a substrate that can support burrow construction and isn't just going to collapse on them or foil any attempt that they have of trying to burrow in it in the first place. Now, a couple of arboreal species like the Heteroscodra maculata, pokies, especially as slings, will burrow. A couple of arboreal species do burrow. Substrate tends to have a far more abstract use for them, and that is in the raising of humidity. Now, I didn't include substrates in the humidity video due to time constraints. However, I'm going to mention it here, and I'm going to talk about how different substrates can be used in different enclosures to different effects. I'll show you a dry enclosure, a moist enclosure, an in-between enclosure, an arboreal enclosure, and maybe a few others. Right, the first one I'm going to look at is one of the most common spiders in the hobby, if not the most common. Grammostola rosea, chili rose hair, or chili rose. Here she is, my little girl. Lovely and docile, very calm, very well behaved. But yeah, the substrate that you can see here, it's kept bone dry, of course. It's chili rose. The only moisture she needs at all is her water bowl. Keep that topped up, the rest will come from food. But in here, we have three little bits of substrate, three different types of substrate all mixed together. The first of these, let me pick out a few, little bits of orchid bark. Now these are softened orchid bark. They're also non-cedar, non-pine. Cedar and pine are toxic to your tarantula. But here we are, just little orchid bark chips, and those add a little bit of stability to the soil. The soil itself, all this, is just potting soil. Sold as potting soil at your local garden centre, B&Q, home base, whatever. Make sure it's organic, no chemical additives. And the final little bit, it's hard to see in here because it's mixed in well now, but there's a lot of sand. I say a lot, I mean it's about a 30% sand composition. Here we've probably got 30% sand to, I'd estimate about 50% potting soil and maybe 20% of the orchid bark. It just keeps it nice and dry, keeps the ground nice and firm for her. She's done a little burrow here, under there, which she does actually use. Right, that's my chili rose. So let's pop her to one side and move on to the next. This is my Solanocosmia dichromata, New Guinea black femur. She's very aggressive. I hate the term aggressive for spiders. Actively defensive tends to be the better term. She will actually charge at you. She'll rear at me if she's out and about before I've even opened the tank. So I'm going to take the complete lid off, because at the moment she's in here, in a nice little webbed bit she's done. And I'm fairly confident that she won't come out. Of course, if she does, I'll just run screaming. Now, the substrate I use here, it's actually peat this time, ground peat. That's why it's so dark. It's a nice dark substrate, and I am actually going to put my hand in here and take a handful, naturally, so I can show you completely what's in there. There we are. There's a lot of soil, ground bits of vermiculite for added moisture, and little bits of orchid bark, which is partly just for the looks, also because orchid bark can, not much, but can assist with moisture. I basically took a load of peat, poured a load of that into the bottom for about an inch depth, then sprinkled in a couple of handfuls of this ground up vermiculite, and then did the same with the orchid bark pieces. The idea here is that all the tiny bits of vermiculite and the peat itself will hold the moisture absolutely fantastically. Next up is my Aphanopelma seemanni. That's a Costa Rican zebra. Now, this is a species that you get a lot of conflicting reviews about. A lot of people say, oh, they love it moist. Other people say, oh, you can keep them relatively dry. I go for a middle ground. That's why I want to show you this one. Now, the substrate is mainly, I'd say about 50% potting soil. I did sprinkle a few orchid bark chips in here again, because she has burrowed. She's made a nice little burrow under this curved bit of cork bark, and those little chips give added stability to any burrowing she does. In addition, I'm still using vermiculite in this enclosure, nice large chips again, but they're predominantly towards the bottom, and in a relatively low number, just to keep a little bit of humidity up. The unusual substrate I've got in here, I don't know if you can see there's like an orange patch where it's actually coming to the surface for once. There's a lot of sand in here, orange sand. Just orange desert sand. You can Exoterra market it. Let's do a load of other little companies. The theory is that the orchid bark and the potting soil are your standard substrates. They allow her to burrow quite nicely, as she has done. The potting soil and the vermiculite hold the moisture, and the sand, while also just adding a nice bit of colour to an otherwise drab substrate, also when it's moist holds its shape well, and it really does hold that moisture. Now, it sounds weird that sand holds its moisture. When you think of sand, you think of deserts. That's why it's only in a very small amount here. It clumps together, and you get nice soggy bits of sand buried under the rest of the substrate. Most of the sand, when I poured this in, I poured a layer of vermiculite, then a layer of sand, then mixed up the potting soil and the orchid bark and sprinkled that on top. That means that as you water it, most of it will go through the sand to the vermiculite and moisten up. As it comes out of the vermiculite, it hits the sand, the moist sand, and creates nice little pockets of moisture. The potting soil holds the moisture relatively well, and then on top of that, you've got your little bits of orchid bark just for the stability. The next one I want to discuss is my pink toad enclosure, how I keep these. Now, these are a species that you want to have a lot of humidity in, yet most people don't bother with substrate. What they do is they put a large water bowl at the bottom and then just leave it at that. I should actually point out, with the Solanacosmia, I've given her a slightly deeper water bowl than usual, and a bigger one than I would have done for her size, simply because I want that to add moisture to the environment. I've got a tiny little water bowl there, which she will drink from. Actually needs topping up. And I do actually have about 1.5 inches of substrate at the bottom. Now, if I just pull out some of the substrate, if I've dug around in it a little bit earlier, prior to this video, again you see there's lots of vermiculite. This time I've used bigger pieces, and on top of that I've put a tiny amount of potting soil and some coarser orchid bark. Coarser as in it's bigger chips this time. Again, still no pine, no cedar. When I mist this enclosure, I give that substrate a good soaking. The vermiculite absorbs it under all the potting soil, and the potting soil creates a barrier, and the wood chips on the top are there just to make things look pretty, I'll admit, but that tends to hold the moisture really quite well. So there we go, those are the substrates that I use, basically varying mixes of potting soil or peat, vermiculite, orchid bark, not cedar or pine, and the occasional bit of sand. Hope this has been of help, but if you do have any questions, do feel free to ask and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Cheers guys, and thanks for watching.